started now. I'm Donna Ulrich with Neighborhoods Without Borders, and thank you for coming this evening. We're looking at disenfranchisement and the issues of disenfranchisement as that impacts voting, hoping that we can inspire people to think about getting out and upping the vote and learning something about the elections that helps persuade us all to be better, more conscientious voters. This evening we've got Natasha, this is my fault, Natasha Thomas Jackson and Hubert Roberts talking about disenfranchisement. Mr. Roberts is going to talk about the history and lay kind of a foundation, and then Natasha's going to talk about some of the real contemporary issues that's impacting voting with that. Neighborhoods Without Borders is a grassroots group. We're not even a 501c3. We're just a group of people who get together and are trying to work on reducing and breaking down the borders, the barriers in town that are based on things like race, like religion, things that people see as being different among our neighbors, and those things that then, if they don't understand them, they fear them, and then they grow to hate them, and suddenly we have neighbors against neighbors. So what we're trying to do is create, by offering this program and a couple of others at this point, ways for us to get to know each other and understand that we're all in this together and we all have the same concerns in life, regardless of the color of our skin. So that's who we are. The Tendaji Talks are named after Tendaji Ganges, who died almost 3 years ago now. And Tendaji was just a workaholic when it came to things like this. And so we chose to honor his memory with this program. So Mr. Roberts and Ms. Thomas Jackson are in place now, so I will turn it over to them. Again, Mr. Roberts is going to talk about the history, kind of lay the foundation, and then Ms. Thomas Jackson is going to talk more about what's going on right today in that area.
Okay, guys, I want to just welcome everybody for coming out today. It's so exciting to see everybody in the audience. One thing that I would like to first start off with is, who are lovers of Star Trek? Who loves Star Trek? The Next Generation, Voyager, and all those things. Now, what is one of the unique things about Star Trek? What is one of the running themes of Star Trek? Come on, I need you to talk. What is one of the running themes? Diversity, what else? Star Trek.
Respect for other cultures.
Respect for other cultures. And what is one of the slogans that it said? Go where no man has gone before. That's what I'm talking about. And again, when you think about that, in a nutshell, what Star Trek really did, or Gene Roddenberry, his concept was really revolutionary, because for a great degree, what he was doing was saying that even in our differences, basically we're all the same and want all of the same things. And I think that's something that over the time, as far as for millions of years and just lately that we're dealing in our contemporary time, we've gotten kind of far away from that to a great degree. Now, I don't know any of you guys that got your cheat sheet. There was a little item on the table where I wanted you guys to pick up. And what I wanted to do is get someone in the audience to help with this definition. This is going to be a call and response, so we're going to be interactive so y'all won't get bored and walk away. So I'd like someone in the audience to first read this paragraph here. It says, what does it mean to disenfranchise someone? So I'd like someone to give their voice to this effort. Go ahead, Doctor. You?
Disenfranchised first appeared in English in the 17th century, preceded for a period of some 200 years by the now uncommon word disfranchise. Though both words are rather obviously related to franchise, they have nothing to do with the word's current sense, quote, a team that is a member of a professional sports league. The original meaning of franchise was, quote, freedom from servitude or restraint. Although disenfranchised does broadly signify depriving someone of any of a number of legal rights, it is most often used today for withholding the right to vote or the diminished social or political status of a marginalized group.
Thank you so much, my sister. Now, as we just read, it says disenfranchisement, and our topic is racism and the midterm election. And what I'm going to suggest that you guys do that do have your paperwork and your assignment that you are obedient to do and pick up off the table. 1776. Some of you guys may have been around in 1776. Those of you that was there, you know what happened. 1776, it was explicit in this country. There was a Declaration of Independence, and what it brought about was the only person that has the power to vote was land-owning white people. Those were the only people that had power to vote and to exercise that power. Now, what I do want to present to you guys is like a football team or any kind of sports team. If you think about this, guys, when we think about disenfranchisement as opposed to being enfranchised. So if you have a team, and most of you guys are familiar with sports, so let's say that you own a team, and you own the stadium, you own the concession, the parking, the uniform, the insurance, you own everything. You have devised the rules of conduct and behavior. You have devised the money scale, who get paid what. You also have devised even laws, policies, and procedures that will protect you from almost anything. Meaning, think about this. When we think about equity or equality, in 1865, think about this. In 1865, the black wealth of people of color in this country was 0.05%. Today is less than 1%. Y'all think about that. 0.05%, and keep it an analogy of a team, and today is less than 1%. So when you're saying that you own all of the possibilities of this team, you have the ability to control this team the way you want to control it, no matter what happens to people that are marginalized or have no voice? The audience, what happens? If you're saying you have someone that wants to be or play on your league or be a part of your team, and again, you have all the rules and regulations in place that you can deny a group or a person to participate in your game. And it's the same thing that we're dealing with every day in America. So if you have laws, rules, and regulations in place, and you think about that, guys, because if you think about 1865, when the so-called emancipation or allowing people of color to participate in the voting exercise, because you think about it, the whole concept of voting is power. So the power is in the area of the voting so you can administer resources. It's all about who controls those resources. So if you got all the laws, rules, and policies on your side to control the resources, and those that are not on that level, that creates what we have today. We have a systemic or stratification of the income that has been designed from day one in America. America was developed. People were here already. Those people that were here already were not allowed to vote. Those individual migrants or immigrants that came in, at one time in 1865, you had immigrants from Sicilia, from a lot of European countries, came to America. As far as you can see, you can claim it. And many of those same people back then are living on the legacy of their ancestors from that wealth hundreds of years ago. So a lot of times people talk about people are lazy, don't want to work, don't have no gump to want to do anything, or they're mad at individuals because their community looks the way it does, or there are certain stereotypes of saying people can't learn or don't have those opportunities. I don't care who you are. If you are not given the resources and the opportunities to espouse your God-given talents that God has put inside of you, if everything that has been designed on your team is designed to marginalize you or to keep you in a certain place or box, the possibility of you being invested in a community or society or a nation is limited. And that's what we're dealing with today. And a lot of times I get frustrated because if you think about it, guys, if I shoot somebody in here in the back, say if I shot you in the back, I pay you as a law enforcement or anyone, I pay you tax dollars to perform a service. And all of us want to be protected. But if I'm paying you to perform a service and you discharge your weapon into a young person's body, and then there is no justification, or you choke someone to death, there's no justification. Michael Brown laid in Ferguson for 4 hours. Michael Brown, after he was gunned down, laid on the pavement for 4 hours. And they allowed the canine unit dog to go urinate on him. You know, you think about that mindset when we think about disenfranchised. When a person or people are disenfranchised, and at one time we had 4 million people of color or Africans, descendants from Africans that were emancipated. And so today we have 44 million African Americans. And you think about it. There are 5 people in the Walton family, the Walmarts. There are 5 members of the Walton family that have more wealth than 44 million people of color in America. Y'all think about this. In America, we have 540 billionaires. We have 540 billionaires in America. We have 10.8 millionaires. Y'all think about that combined wealth in one country. Never in the history of mankind have that much wealth been in one country. And you think about it. If we have that much wealth in this country, why would anybody be disenfranchised in America? If y'all listen to those numbers really produce why would anybody be disenfranchised? But then you got 2% of America that own 80% of the stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. 2% of America own 80% of all the stocks, bonds, and mutual funds in America. How could that be possible? Doctor?
The Walton family has more money than 50% of the population of the United States.
Yes, sir.
Not just the 44 million, 50% of the population of the United States.
I agree.
Can I add to that?
Yeah?
According to USA Today, 8 people have more money than half the population of the world.
Well, actually, it's 63 people that have more money than 6.7 billion people in the world. 63 people have more wealth. And again, when we think about wealth or equity, a lot of times we misconstrue it about what is our personal responsibility. And I think that's what we want to be focusing on, because all of the laws and the rules of the Constitution, every law, policy, procedure that has been instituted in America, for whatever reason, has been usurped. We are witnessing that today. Even in the time when you think about the Fairness Doctrine or the Tillman Act or the Drew Act, I mean, there's a lot of acts that came about, you know, during the 14th, 15th, 16th Amendment pertaining to other groups of people being allowed to participate in the system. So again, I want to just be clear about the system. The system has been designed to make sure even poor whites, and I think that's what's really critical about it, because if you see atrocity or you see things that are wrong, you know they are wrong. You know they are humanly wrong to act or behave in a certain way. And you align yourself with those individuals, just like Sunday. You had Nazi sympathizers in Washington, D.C. And do you know what the Washington Metro authorities did? And this goes back to Plessy versus Ferguson. Y'all think about it. Okay, separate but equal. They had a separate, all-white car, meaning a train car, and they had police protection for the alt-right or for the Nazis to go to and participate in their exercise of free speech. Now y'all think about that. Many times people protest football games or protest different atrocities in their communities when people are gunned down illegally. And most often they bring out the military. They don't bring out anything or anybody to protect those that are using their constitution to protest acts of this government that they don't feel that is fair or right. Doctor?
Yeah, but Uber and Lyft both told all their people in DC that they could refuse to pick up anyone they felt unsafe and that they did not have to accept any fares from any of these folks to get them where they needed to go. The companies themselves said, you don't have to take these people there.
But as,
I think that speaks well to those companies. I think there was one other, but I know that both Uber and Lyft were told you don't have to take the Nazis or the KKK folks
yes, ma'am.
to their events.
Doctor?
In this economic system, your only value is how much, it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you can make for the man. That's your only value. As soon as you can't make money for the man, he just wants you to go.
So when you say that, sir, why wouldn't the NFL players boycott? Why wouldn't they just stop work? Why wouldn't they just quit since they're being demonized and disrespected as grown men? Why? Let me make my point. When you think about working for the man, or if you have any, that's why the union was created. One of the reasons why the union was strong and why there's been a serious attack on the union with ALEC. I know some of you guys may be familiar with ALEC. But one of the reasons why they wanted to do all they could to break the union, the Teamsters and everything, because of collective bargaining, because at one time, even in Flint, Michigan, you know, when you think about the auto industry, you know, the conditions was horrid. People were dying every day in those factories. And unless you have collective bargaining to be treated with safety devices and living wage and insurance and those, so you can be treated like a human being. And one thing that Mr. Ford said that he wanted his workers to be able to buy his vehicle. He knew that that was important. But what has gotten so skewed in America is, America, as you just said, it is a business. America was founded, was taken from people that was already here, and those people were marginalized and basically genocide. And then you saying, so I'm going to build this country and bring black people over to build this country. And then I'm going to make sure that I cut off any access to education or opportunity. Because you think about it, any one of us here can learn about almost anything given the right resources and opportunities. When you cut that off, when you deny that at all levels, I'm talking about locally, because that's what they did. The federal government want to say, well, let's leave it to the states. Well, the states was clear. The states said that we're going to do it the way we want to do it, meaning we're going to protect Anglo-Saxons. That's our position. That's what we're going to do. And again, when you got people from other nationalities or people that want to be a part of the American experience, again, they should have that right. But the NFL players, again, I really think that it's terrible that we're in a situation where those players in their union have no voice because they're more concerned about their material wealth as opposed to their humanity. Because they tried substitute players twice. And to be an NFL player, that is a skilled job. They're not dumb jocks, and that's a lie. Those guys and what they go through on a daily basis is really critical. So I just hope that a little bit of what I said will help you guys have a little foundation on the history of some disenfranchisement in this country. And so we're going to bring it around to my sister to deal with a little bit contemporary now.
Thank you. So thank you to Mr. Roberts. I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of like contemporary suppression, what that looks like, what it looks like in marginalized communities. I work for an organization that is particularly focused on the youth vote, millennials, which, depending on which source you ask, it's, you know, with generations it's always kind of hard to define, but so when we say millennial, what do people think? Like, what age group do you think?
25 and 35.
So some people said 35 and under, right? It's usually around 37. 37 is kind of considered an older millennial, all the way to like early 20s. So millennials are not actually, a lot of times people use the term millennials to talk about like teenagers. Teenagers are different, yeah, they're Gen Z or something like that. But yeah, millennials are those voters between like 22, 37, 38. It's kind of the older end on the cusp. But millennials are right now the largest voting bloc in the U.S., which means that if they knew that and used that power, there could be a lot of change. But millennials are also the group least likely to go to the polls. But millennials are progressive. Millennials tend to vote very progressively when they do vote. And so part of my work is really helping young people in that age demographic understand how much power they have, how much they can really shift the country. Because as we know, with politicians, it would be nice if they did the right thing just because it was the right thing to do. But the way our system is set up is a system based on numbers. And politicians cater to those people that they know are going to keep them in their position. So when it comes to the issues that young people think are important, those are not high up on the priority list for our leaders because they know that young people don't come to the polls. So when we talk about voter suppression is usually done in ways that marginalize certain communities that tend to vote very progressively. Voter suppression tends to work to benefit like more conservative voters. I don't know if you all know this, but in our primary election here in Michigan, we had record-breaking turnout. Did you all know that? Right, the primaries are not something that people usually get involved in, but this past primary on August 7th, we had record-breaking turnout. We have a record number of voters registered. And a lot of that is because there are lots of efforts to get young voters, new voters to the polls. I also think it's a result of the political climate that we're in. Our current administration has been scary and has been, terrible, but at the same time, it has mobilized people who were not necessarily involved before now realize that we don't really have that luxury of not being involved and not participating. So I just wanted to kind of count that as a win and let people know that we did have record-breaking turnout. In some places they ran out of ballots, like in Wayne County, which again I think is another form of voter suppression because they anticipated record-breaking turnout, right? So they knew that people were going to come to the polls. So I feel like, and that's happened before. So I feel like once you know it's happened before, after that, it starts to feel like, that there's something behind that. That's just kind of my own personal theory around that. But they ran out of ballots in some of the places where people of color live, Wayne County, and we tend to find that when those mistakes happen, they do tend to happen more in certain communities where certain people live. So I want to talk a little bit about how suppression looks currently and how there are certain things going on in different states that really, dissuade people from voting. Young people, because young people are such a progressive bloc, there are things that stop them from voting. People of color. In New Hampshire, they are working on a bill that will require students to have a state driver's license. Now in New Hampshire, they have colleges, they have people who are coming there to go to school, but don't necessarily have a license in that state. But also license, they cost, right? So anytime there's you have to pay something that disenfranchises young people in that state who go to school and don't necessarily have a license, it disenfranchises people who can't pay that license fee right now. And then in Wisconsin, they required an ID for you to vote and then didn't make sure that they had a timely application process for people to actually get those IDs before it was time to vote. So those are all kinds of ways that people can do that. There's a lot of voter intimidation at polls. I don't know if you all remember, but Trump at one point called on his supporters to go to the polls to monitor the polls, right? Because he was talking about, that there might be all of this voter fraud, and he was telling his supporters to come to the polls. And really, when you read between the lines on that whole idea of monitoring people at the polls, usually what that is intimidation. That people go there, kind of stand and watch you. So that's a way that they suppress votes. And then felons' rights is another one. Does anybody know, can you vote with a felony in Michigan?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. Everybody in here knows that, but a lot of people don't, and a lot of people have been told here in Michigan that they cannot vote as felons. And we register people to vote all the time, and I constantly run into people that say, I've been in jail, I can't vote. Somebody told me I can't vote. And sometimes it's somebody like in a position of power, like somebody at DHS or somebody that should know those laws because they work with people who are coming out of prison. But yes, you can vote. In Michigan, there's different laws for different states, but in Michigan, you can vote if you're a felon. You can vote if you're on parole or probation. You just can't vote. I'm gonna get you in just a second. You just can't vote if you're actually incarcerated, right? So if you've been in jail, you're on parole, probation, even if you're awaiting trial, the only way that you cannot vote is if you're actually serving time.
And then let me add a little bit something to that is, there are 32 states right now that does not allow returning citizens to vote. 32 states, and who implemented that was this group called ALEC. Some of you guys may be familiar with it, but there's 32 states right now. And then one of the biggest things that she was saying is that is almost 3.7, my number's right, almost 3.7 million people that could participate. My sister?
I just have a question. After the person returns back home, do they have to re-register?
Well, registration is, it's linked to where you live. So usually, yes, it's linked to where you live. So you need to be registered to vote where you live. Yeah. And then a lot of times there's a lot of closing of polling locations. Those closings tend to happen just the way like school closings happen in certain communities. And then what that does is it creates a bottleneck effect where if people can't vote at multiple polling locations, it makes the lines longer for where they can vote. It makes them have to travel further. Lots of people don't have the luxury of standing in line for hours and hours. They have to get to work, they have to get to school. So that's another way that you kind of suppress the vote and you can control the vote and how people turn out is by closing the polls in certain communities, marginalizing them, and then putting them in a position where they may have to choose between staying in line or losing their job, right? Because everybody can't just stay in line like that. Another big thing, particularly in this election, and this wasn't always the case in Michigan, but it is the law now, that because we have like open elections here, which means that people don't have to declare a party before they vote. In some states they do. They make you just, vote. If you're a Democrat, you're a Republican. We don't necessarily do that here, but in our primary elections, people are not allowed to split their ballot. Who knows what to split a ballot means? Yeah, go ahead.
It's where you vote somebody in each party, even though they may be for different offices. You cannot do that in
Right.
primary.
Right. So because we don't have to declare whether we're Democrat or Republican, we have to vote with one particular party. So your ticket has to either be Democratic or has to be Republican. And they don't tell people that, and that will disqualify your ballot. And people don't know that. So if you decide I want to vote for, one Democratic candidate here and one Republican there, that will disqualify your ballot. Yes.
That will spoil your ballot, not disqualify. You can bring it back and say, I made a mistake, and we give you a new one.
That's how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to work where the machine will indicate that there's a split. However, there have been reports, at least in this last primary, and again in Wayne County, where they ran out of ballots, that the poll worker was not trained on that properly. And so that when it was beeping, that poll worker did not tell people what that meant. So those are the kind of things where like voter education and all of that is important. But yes, that's how it should work. Yes.
I voted here in this building, and there were at least 3 people telling everybody, don't split your ballot, this is what splitting the ballot is, and they were
And that's-
on top of it.
And that kind of shows you some of the disparity, because where I voted, I didn't have anybody there telling anybody that.
And these were the workers, these were the
Right.
people who were, helping and counting and.
And that's how it should be, but there's not a uniform experience, which is another form of suppression. They didn't tell anybody that? Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too. It wasn't verbally communicated at where I voted at. And if you don't read it before you start, you just jump into it because you're just ready to vote. So And if they don't know how, if the beat happens and people still are not communicating, you can go and, correct your vote and only vote one party. Then they'll just walk out thinking that they voted correctly and they vote wrong.
Right. So all of those things, they suppress the vote. They make it difficult for people to vote. And then there's what I think like a lack of systemic education and engagement of voters. I feel like we don't have a place where voters can go to really be educated. And we know that our voting system, our electoral system is a very, it's a convoluted, it's layered, it's complicated. It's hard to really know what the issues are, who the people you're voting from. There's no centralized location. We don't really focus on voter education in high school or college. And so it makes it so that the burden of really knowing what you need to know to vote falls on voters. Voters who are sometimes working 2 and 3 jobs, taking care of kids, and not always knowing where to go. And I think that kind of lack of education and engagement of voters, I do think that's an intentional form of suppression, because what you have is a whole bunch of people who, if they want to really know how to vote, they have to dig and dig and dig. And of course we have things like our local elections and our state and federal, and it's hard to know like what's going on in this congressional district and what's my congressional district and who are my leaders and what's on the ballot. And there's no really systemic way for people to find that out unless they just like to dig for that information all the time and have it. So that to me is also a form of suppression, and it's a systemic form of suppression that does not have to be the case. We can create, our political leaders can create better systems so that voters are more informed. But of course then, when voters are more informed, they're more in a position to hold those leaders accountable. So it works to their benefit in many ways for us not to be informed. What's that? Oh yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. Because I hear what you're saying about systemic, things that go on. But my question is this. I go to the barbershop to get my hair cut, right? And I talk about the election at the barbershop.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody is voting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, nothing's going to make a damn difference. I hear all these things. We don't have to sit back and wait for people to go someplace and be educated. We can take that information.
Absolutely.
I don't know what is being done. I mean, I know you're not going to go running around all the barbershops, but I mean, this is a way we may be able to take the information to people who need to hear it, because they're not going to come out.
Absolutely.
And I know people who have not voted ever, 30, 40 years old, ever, because it's not going to make a difference, is what I've been hearing. And to me, personally, I don't care if it makes a difference or not. Too many of my ancestors had to die for this.
Yes.
So that's my approach.
I think
address her really quick.
Okay.
Thank you. So I was just going to say, I think that it kind of segues into what I was going to talk about next, and is about persuading voters. And I think some of that starts with really kind of, I work in a political organization where voting is a very big thing. And we're always like, people need to vote, and if they don't vote, they're apathetic, and why aren't they getting involved? And I think I like to start from the place of empathizing with why people don't want to vote, right? Because I think about something that happened here in Flint, where the people in Flint clearly said, we do not want an emergency manager. We said that with our voices, we said that with our vote, and what happened? So there are lots of times that this system has failed people, right? This electoral system has failed people. Politicians have made promises that didn't come through. And so to me, it makes perfect sense why somebody would not want to vote. So I like to start there when I'm talking to people, instead of shaming people, because I understand why they don't. So when people say, I don't want to, I say, I feel you. I completely understand, because it's a very broken system. Even though I work and I encourage people to vote, I acknowledge that this is not a perfect tool, but it's the tool that we have right now. And it's the most effective tool, and we use the tool we have until we can refine our tools to have better tools. But that's where I like to start with non-voters, because they opt out for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's because they've seen a failure of the system. Sometimes, honestly, voting is a very intimidating process. Right? When you think about, I got to go look at this ballot. That ballot is an intimidating document. When I think about people who may have, reading disabilities, language, all of these things, When I think about all the work and research, it has to go into understanding things like who's running in the ballot initiatives. And I think sometimes people throw out the idea of like, I don't vote because it doesn't work. They throw that out as a blanket reason, but I think some people, if they were really honest, would say, I'm scared of voting. I don't know how to vote, I don't know how to research, I don't know how to be, you know what I mean? And so and rather than say that, because that makes people feel very vulnerable, they just say, I don't care about voting. So I think I like to start from the place of like first empathizing and asking why they don't want to vote and letting them know I understand that. And then asking them what it is that they do want. You know, what is it that you do care about? You know, I've talked to young people where they say, well, I care about the fact that my brother is in jail. And I talked to them about, like in Ferguson, which Mr. Roberts mentioned, in Ferguson, where Mike Brown, before Mike Brown was shot, about 30% of the black population in Ferguson was registered to vote. After that, that swelled to 70%, and they voted that DA out, right? They voted that person out. So I like to give examples like that like, I like people to know, like, the political is personal, and I think that's a quote by like Audre Lorde or somebody, but that everything that they can think of that might be an issue that they really care about, I like to find a way to link it to policy. So they can understand that you may not care about voting, right, but you care about housing. You need to think about who you're voting in that's making housing decisions, who you're voting in that is running the judicial system in your local, state, and federal, levels. And a lot of times I like to localize it because people tend to think of elections like the big presidential election. They like to talk about Trump, and we definitely need to be paying attention to those, but it's those local and state elections that make the greatest impact. Who we have as governor in Michigan has shown us, how devastating that can be, who our governor is. And so I really like to bring it home and just kind of like let them know that any issue that you can name can be linked to policy. Every aspect of our lives is a policy decision. And so we need to be thinking about who are making those decisions. I think I saw a hand over here, and I think Mr. Roberts wants to call you. Go ahead.
Both my wife and I are workers in Grand Blanc Township, and all of the workers for the Grand Blanc Township elections, to my knowledge, are a bunch of old retired people, and we're slow when it comes to the computerized poll book. Mm-hmm. So one thing that we always do, because we're chair of 2 different precincts, when we see what looks to be like a young, intelligent voter, we say, hey, would you want to be an election worker? Mm-hmm. And we tell them, go to the clerk's office, fill out an application, and we need young people that are really computer literate. That would speed up the voting process. Mm-hmm. The other comment I wanted to make, I encourage people to get an absentee ballot. Now, I know you have to check off that you're over 60 or that you're disabled, or you can check that you aren't able to come on election day. So tell people to apply for an absentee ballot and check that they're not able to, and maybe...
They're not going to be there between the hours of this night.
And for a lot of the millennials, people with jobs where they find their schedule out the week before, that might be true. Mm-hmm. And then they've got a ballot that they can study, and then they can research and ask people, hey, what do you know about these people running for this office or this proposal? Mm-hmm. Absentee ballots, I think, is the way to go when you're not sure what all the things are going to be on the ballot.
Right.
Yeah, I think with the young lady, and I love what you just said about the engagement of our young people and then all of us. But, when people do articulate their disappointment in the system and the structure of the system, like she said, we try to use other information to connect them to valuing something they value. And so just like healthcare or anything, or education, because when we really get down to the nitty-gritty, when you think about the median income in America for black and white people, $17,600 for black people, $100,000 671,000 for white people. So why is that important? So when you think about money and how it relates to opportunities and resources, because those individuals at the barbershop and in certain communities that have been cut off, that have been literally for historical reasons saying that this group of community or these group of people is going to stay in this box, and we're going to make sure that they stay marginalized for generations and generations to come. All of us collectively, our goal and our responsibility as human beings, because we are going to die, so our job is to live our lives with a purpose. And if we can influence or make an impact in our groups, our families, our people we connected to really encourage people to think outside the box and think more inclusive, because that is going to be the issue as far as how we're going to get out of some of these things that we're dealing with, as far as how we can come back to humanity towards loving and working together for equitable society that we all can participate in. Go ahead, sis.
I saw a hand here and then here.
Well, I believe that the League of Women Voters has been working to get a ballot initiative for this fall on the ballot, at least here in the state of Michigan, to make voting easier, to open up absentee ballots to everyone without qualifications. There's several things on there, and I know that their website has a lot of information, but again, you have to have computer access, you have to be able to navigate the site. I'm not saying that's, going to be available to everyone, but I know every time I walk in the library, those computers are full. So, there are some resources. It's just letting people know.
And where to go to
find them.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part.
Okay, I see two right here, and then I'm going to conclude. And then I do think we have a Q&A, but I think we've kind of been doing the Q&A. That's just fine. Go right ahead.
People talk about their freedom, their liberties, and their rights. But in America, if you don't have money, you have no freedom, no liberties, or rights. And I won't agree with you. There's a survey out there on the net that the United States is the second most ignorant country in the industrialized world. Always number one. If you don't vote, that means you are ignorant.
You are
ignorant because you are going to be stuck where you're at. Because if you can't get that system to work for you, you are doomed. And I'll be the first to say, you can't do American politics unless you can embrace the absurd. Our political system is absurd. Give you Trump, right? That is just absurd what happened in that election. So if you don't want to do the energy, if you're just too damn lazy to vote, then you're just too damn lazy to vote.
Let me ask you, if I'm trying to persuade somebody to register to vote, how successful do you think I would be if my opening line was about, I'm just asking you. I understand that that's how you feel, but I want to know how successful do you feel I would be in persuading somebody with that line of thought?
I'm too old now. I have lost so many elections. And so many, the Vietnam War, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon. I've lost too much. I have no patience anymore. And I'm an old guy.
And I hear you.
I'm going to tell you, people didn't vote. People did not go to the polls in 2010. The most important election is that every 10th-year election. If the people who voted for Obama would vote for Bernardo, we would never saw Rick Snyder. Those numbers are out there.
So in the same way that when I meet like a voter who has kind of checked out and I try to meet them at a place of empathy, I also understand where you're coming from. As somebody who's been doing this work for a very long time, I can definitely understand why you would feel like I'm tired, I don't have the patience. And in some ways cynical, because I've been doing this work much less longer than you have, and I feel that way some days. But when I think about, give me just a second. So when I think about when I have conversations with conversation with two young men downtown Flint who did not want to vote. I sat there and engaged them for about 30 to 45 minutes and ended up convincing them to vote. It was time well invested, but it took for me to empathize where they were coming from. I could not start from a place of you're ignorant if you don't vote. I could not start from a place of not understanding why two young black men who had experienced police brutality, who had been abused by the judicial system, who went to failing schools, you know what I mean? I had to understand why all of those things contributed to their worldview in order to even start that conversation with them. To start with a place of like, you're ignorant or you don't, that would not work, right? I need to understand how you came to this conclusion, and then from there, work with you to understand how all of those things that you just said for the reasons why you don't vote are exactly why you need to vote, right? You need to vote because it impacts your community and your schools. So all I'm saying is that we all have our different entry points into this work, and I think that you do well by we're meeting people where they are and understanding where they're coming from, and then bring them back around. That's my approach, and it has worked. I've seen it work. We can get two more, and then I do want to, I'm supposed to actually conclude so we can have a Q&A. I just want to say really quick, I'll get you to, I just want to kind of conclude what I was going to say. I don't know the gentleman's name in the red, but you mentioned bringing young people into the process and having them come and work at the polls. And that was kind of where I was going to end with that this is very important, not just to engage young people as voters, but really being encouraging them to be elected officials. Because, there is a skill set, even in the organization that I work in. I'm 38. And a lot of the people that I work with are like in their early 20s, and I even see a difference in terms of how they work, right? There's even a generational difference where how they're processing stuff, how they're doing stuff is just a different, and I learn a lot from them. And so I think like a lot of times when we think of the younger generation, we think of them as apathetic, but there's a skill set that comes along with the environment that they grew up in, which is different than environments that each generation, like I think about my 9-year-old son, who seemed like he was born knowing how to like work computers. He can whip through stuff. He can go on your phone and program and download. But that's what makes a difference when you come into, you're born into a situation that like, I don't know, we didn't even get like online until I was like 18, right? Up until that point, I had to go to like the library. If I wanted something, I had to go through encyclopedias to get information. There was no Google. I can't even tell my kids I don't know something, because they'll say, well, why can't you Google it? Why can't you go figure it? Like that's literally a response, like there's no reason for you not to know. I can't say I don't know anymore, but that comes from living in this age where information is instant. But on the flip side, the danger of that is that there's so much information, and then we have failing schools, we have school systems that really never were, had a structure of teaching critical thinking. So what happens is you have an influx of information with less filters to determine which information is valid, which information is. So that's the challenge of living in the information age. But I agree, we want young people who understand today's systems, who understand where we're going tomorrow, and we want to encourage them to not just vote for leaders, but to become leaders, and to support them in that. So that kind of concludes just what I wanted to talk about. I think we can do a Q&A, and I saw your hand and your hand, and I don't know if Donna, how we want to do the Q&A. We just want to reveal this together.
Conversation's great. We usually just let them break up into a conversation.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's great. And I'll just give you I forgot to say at the beginning, we try really hard to be out of here before 8 because that's when the building closes. So I'll give you a warning if we start to run out of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I saw your hand.
I live in Flint, not in one of the select neighborhoods, and what I've seen is really sad to me and some of my other neighbors. A few years ago, we voted for more police and to keep our neighborhood libraries open. We don't live near downtown. We live farther out. So they closed all our neighborhood libraries. Kids used to use the libraries. It's really disturbing to me that they just choose certain neighborhoods in Flint to survive and the rest of us are failing. And just they're spleen because the police don't come. We're not protected. And we made a vote to have our libraries because we value children and education. Just everything's for downtown. It's really upsetting to people. That's all. They want us out. A lot of people feel they want us out because we're old timers. we're not useful to them. They brought the people here to work in the shops, and now that the shops are closed, we're not wanted here anymore. And it's very sad.
And I heard you mention gentrification in the back, which is a.
Yeah, that's what I'm
I heard you.
Well, that's what I'm
Yes.
talking about, because we're not listened to, because we don't live in one of the nice neighborhoods they want to keep.
Mhm.
So it is very disturbing to see that we're not listened to when we do vote. All neighborhoods should have access to libraries. That was a big one with a lot of people. And we voted for it. They took our money.
Absolutely. And so that's where I feel like we start with that idea of like empathizing with people, why they check out. They check out for those reasons, and we have to convince them to come back and to do it. But I completely understand why people feel
And not only
disillusioned.
check out, they move. And which leaves your neighborhood desolate with empty houses. They're so angry about what's going on. The neighborhood's emptied out. And it's very sad, because that was one of the neighborhoods where there used to be lines to go vote. Now I'm like, I went to vote and I was the only one there in my precinct. But I guess that's what the city wants, you know? You can't fight it.
I just wanted to follow up on her comment about the League of Women Voters. There should be two proposals that are on the next election ballot. Both of them have to do with voting. One of them will be about eliminating gerrymandering and having our districts drawn up by a group of people that are not politicians, that legislators have no control over, and that will be equally represented by Democrat and Republican and independents. The other one has to do with how we vote. And what she was talking about is that they're trying to make sure that you can get absentee ballots for no reason, and that you can have time to read through your ballot and put your ballot in the mail or take it over to your local township hall and have your vote count, but have enough time to understand what you're voting on, what the issues are, and have a little bit more knowledge about what you're voting on before you have to vote. If you just do it when you walk into voting night, there's a lot of stuff on there that people don't even know are on ballot.
Yeah, because there's not, a large like public education campaign about those issues. Paid sick leave is on our ballot this time, right? The idea that you should, but that we don't have, you have to go find that information. And a lot of times you have to have access to computers. It's not information that's dispersed, door to door. So in that way, I do think that is a disenfranchisement. People should have easy access to understand what is going to be on their ballot.
It used to be we had the newspaper, and that would have all the candidates and the offices and the proposal. And how many homes now have a newspaper?
Yeah, it's digitized, and then it's not even local. So like places like in Live, you have to then navigate that to find your local news. So yeah, it's just lots of layers.
I know the Hispanic Technology Center, I know Ralph Ariano, they worked with the county clerk's office, and they had a practice set up like a polling place and had a practice ballot. And I know I went to the clerk's office and picked up some of their information, flyers and things that I took down to the jazz concert, and had a table there to get out. And there was a lot of things I didn't know on there, and I think of myself as being one of those overly involved people. But there's just a lot of information out there, basic information about voting. But that might be a good thing to work if you're working with young people.
I think that's a great idea. The idea of having like mock
and they call
voting
it
days
a
where people
practice
can come and
ballot.
practice. Yes, absolutely.
So, I would like to go back to the young lady, and she was talking about gentrification and, our communities being attacked. And I think when we think about the inception of this country, and I forget this German philosopher that said this, he mentioned about how several different people, the laborer and different people would ask for help, and a person would say, well, no, and then when it came to you, there was nobody to help you. I think in the inception of this country, by us not wanting to be equal, or that the resources be divided up equally, that's why we find ourselves here today. And I think the real sickness of the cancer is racism in America. A lot of us don't, when you talk about progressive, liberals or Republicans or anything, white supremacy, has been a DNA factor in this country. If you look at the policing alone, or the justice system, the justice system spends $210 billion a year to either prison, jail, probation, or parole over 9 million Americans. And right now in America, you have 23 million Americans living with felonies that don't have access, like you just said, to housing, to education, to health care, to a number of resources. Although they are returning citizens, they still are human beings and vital to our society as a whole. But we live in a society that we can pick and choose and saying, because you have committed a crime and now you're back home, then you're no longer a human being or have any value. Again, when we think about our elections and the power that we have, the politicians work for us. I think we got it skewed to some degree. We keep thinking, as the young lady saying about the barbers and our children and about us collectively, we need to do some things ourselves by moving our feet and start demanding that in our homes, starting in our homes. There were a time when there were no technology and people did stuff by the grapevine, word of mouth, and got things done. And I think it's a shame that we live in as much technology as we supposed to have, quote unquote, today, that we find ourselves bumping into each other by not coming together collectively across all ethnic grounds. Because when you think about housing, and when you think about a lot of times policing, policing to some people is different to me because of the way I'm treated by the police. So when I hear policing, I get a different connotation because it's not coming for no kumbaya moment, and I'm many times not doing nothing wrong. That in itself is unacceptable. So when we're saying collectively, most often when you think about political stratification in our society that we're living in, it's all about power and controlling that power. Or if I'm living in Grand Blanc or Canton or Royal Oak or Grosse Pointe, then my homes are costing $3 or $4 or $1 million, then I'm living in a certain lifestyle in a certain community. And again, I don't have any feelings or interest in what's going on down the street on Jefferson, maybe a few miles away. I'm not even concerned, but sooner or later, that's going to hit your door. A lot of times we talked about the war on drugs or what have you, but when the opiate crisis, and now they're getting treatment and getting all this kind of care, when there was the drug war on black and brown people, and right now, we've got over 9 million black and brown people, more than anything in the history of mankind. There are more black and brown people locked up today in America that was enslaved in 1865. That's insane. Because incarceration or the Justice Department has become a business. It is a real business. Right now, when you think about what they did on the border and snatching those children away from those immigrants that they did, and now they can't find them, you got these private prisons that are they have some buildings, guys. They got buildings where they are housing children in buildings. I mean, high-rise Fortune 500 buildings where they got guards and keeping kids in cages.
And private companies who they're in the business of doing that, right?
Unacceptable.
I saw her hand, your hand, and then I want to, I saw your hand first.
Me?
Yep.
Oh, I'm trying to hold my head so I don't explode. I mean, these are all the things that we talk about, but when you're talking to people who it doesn't affect them, the opiate situation. I was in New York City in the 70s when junkies were, nodding and falling over, and I saw all of that then. Methanol didn't come along until much later. It came down, but it didn't help the people who needed help. I've seen enough people drop dead just from trying to get off of stuff. Mothers with children trying to get off of stuff. When it doesn't affect you, and yours, it's not a problem. Now it's an opiate thing It's a problem. It's always been a problem. But now, like you said, my brother-in-law, it's coming from here, but now it's coming to you too, to your neighborhood. And until we recognize that, we can talk and have all these great conversations, but it does not matter to those in power. They're just waiting for people like this poor woman here who was talking about when they were living, how things are going down and people are leaving. I mean, I myself know folks who have left. Some of the best, brightest minds that I went to school with here at Mott, at Baker, at U of M, Flint, they left. They couldn't take it anymore. You can't bring them back. So what do? You work with the people that are here, but honestly, this gentrification is just a cycle. It's gonna keep going. It'll filter out and then it'll come back around. That's what it does. That's what gentrification do. So here we are. How do we stop something that we have no control over? People who are not interested, you can educate and everything you want, but people who are not interested because it doesn't affect them. And I hate to say, some of those people, they ain't gonna never be here. The ones that care, the ones that give a damn, are here. All right, I'm gonna stop.
No, you're good. I think the idea that, even when we talk about like the civil rights movement, I think a lot of people, like, you talk to a lot of people and who were alive during that time, and they act like everybody participated in that. But even that was like a small movement. That kind of change always comes from, like, if it came from the majority of people, we wouldn't live in the world we live in, right? If that was the majority's way of thinking, we would not. That change has always come from like a small groups of dedicated people who understand that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And that those changes that you're working for, you're gonna see some of that, a small portion of that implemented in your lifetime, but most of it you won't. Right, it's more of just this idea you continue to do it anyway, and I know.
I understand what you're saying.
You do.
This is not pain to no one.
Yeah. But again, it's the same message that we're giving to non-voters, right? Just because you take your breaks, but you don't stop. Even with non-voters who are choosing to opt out, that's kind of the same philosophy, that they're like, this doesn't work, I'm not going to do it. The only way to really affect long-term change is just to keep at it, and take your breaks, but keep at it. But I feel like one of the things that we don't discuss is a real, like, a dissection of power and privilege, which is kind of what we've been talking about. And I think, has anybody heard the term intersectionality in here at all?
No, this is academia.
Yes, okay. So yes, intersectionality was a term that was born in like academic institutions and was there for a long time. It was created by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a black woman, feminist, but she used it because what happened was there was a case in a factory, and there were black women who wanted to take their employers, and I can't remember, I want to say it was it GM? It might have even been GM.
It was GM. Okay,
yep, so the black women wanted to sue their employer because they would, for like discrimination, racial and gender discrimination. Because what would happen is their employer would hire black people, but they would hire black men to work in the factory. The factory had an office and it had like a assembly plant. So they would hire black men to work in the assembly plant. Then they would hire white women to work in the office. And so black women were in this space where they could not get hired because they weren't, white enough to work in the office, weren't male enough to work in the assembly plant. And so they wanted to sue for both racial and gender justice, and were told that they had to pick one. They had to pick one because you couldn't sue for both. They ended up losing that case, but out of that came this idea of intersectionality, that you have multiple identities, and those multiple identities overlap. So when I think about what's wrong in this country, I do think white supremacy is the foundation, but I also think patriarchy is, which disenfranchises women, classism, which disenfranchises poor people, ableism, which disenfranchises people who, not even just physically disabled, but people have a lot of mental disabilities that because people can't see them, they don't accommodate that. LGBTQ folks. So what then happens is the more you occupy those marginalized identities, so if I'm a Black woman who's poor, disabled, and lesbian, I have a completely different experience than, you know, maybe a Black woman who's, you know, wealthy or not disabled. Or so these identities overlap. We're not one thing. And all of those communities suffer marginalization. And I think the more that we can recognize that, the more we tend to see like our similarities, right? Because I think sometimes we can get into playing what is called like the oppression Olympics, right? Where one group is like, I'm more oppressed than you, I'm more oppressed than you. And really all of those things, I don't separate being Black from being a woman, right? I'm both of those things all day, every day. And so I think like really kind of taking that intersectional approach and just and knowing too, even as a Black woman, I had a friend who was disabled who really taught me about my own ableism, because privilege blinds you. When you don't have to think about something, you don't see it. So I was always inviting him to places that he couldn't get in, because I had never had to think about whether I can get into a building. I was always doing things based on stereotypes, trying to act like I should take care of him, right? Because I'm this idea he can't take care of himself as a grown person, right? But he had to help me see that. He had to help me see my privilege as an able-bodied person, because privilege blinds us. And so one of the things I know we talk about, like technology and the internet, and it being this place where lots of things happen, but the internet is also a tool that has really, I think in some ways, made some of this social justice activism happen. Because in the past, when I wanted to try to contact somebody, I had to go print up flyers and go around and give it to people, and could only work in a certain vicinity. Now I can talk to people across the world. I can talk to somebody in Palestine. I could talk to somebody, you know, in South Africa. I can see how like our issues relate to each other, and I can do that instantly. And so in some ways, the internet has been very instrumental in like global activism and really waking people up in terms of providing information that used to be locked away in books and institutions. In some ways, the internet has democratized the conversation. You can create your own information now, your own representations, and send them out. You don't have to go through traditional outlets.
And sometimes that can be kind of dangerous as far as, because I mean, that's what if you guys read Mein Kampf, or you understand what the Nazis did with propaganda, again, I think it's very clear. You can sit here and look at me and I can say I've got a pink nose, and again, if I got the power and the control to make you believe that my nose is pink, you're gonna say it's pink because I can fire you or kill you at any moment, and you're gonna do what I say. And that's the same thing with white supremacy. A lot of times when we think about white supremacy and the damaging aspect of it, I could be gay, I could be a lot of different things. And a lot of times in the gay and the LGBTQ community, it doesn't come over to the Black community, because a lot of times when white, gay, our community brothers and sisters get engaged in doing certain things, they don't support, you know, Black individuals that have that kind of lifestyle or deal with that kind of that subject. And so what happens, even in America, in 1711, the first item traded on Wall Street was what? The first item traded on Wall Street in 1711 was what? If you think about it, guys, and I think that's what happens a lot of times when we have conversation, because one thing that we really can do and work on rooting out is some of our internal biases that we have been culturally conditioned to believe. We live in a society where people move into a community and will move out. Don't know anything about these people, but will move out because I don't want to live next to a person that is brown or different. I started off talking about Star Trek. I said Star Trek for a reason, because Star Trek is so profound when it deals with different cultures and races and all types of individuals and beings in the universe, and how we can be tolerant of each other. And I think when you are working in certain environments and you are able at a position to make sure that you are being included, or you're saying that I can come over and have dinner with you, or we can engage in certain conversation, or we can work to make sure that these individuals are going to have these resources based on our policies and the dollars that are in our coffers as local and state and federal money that comes into our community. Because Flint right now, if you think about it, they're spending $1 billion downtown Flint. The north side and the east side is hit, but they're spending $1 billion Not a few million, y'all, 1 billion. And you saying collectively, if we really came together and started working together as human beings to really change our condition collectively, where we can jettison some of these biases and some of these things we've been culturally conditioned to believe about each other, we can be more impactful, because you have liberals that are bigots and racists. You have progressives that are bigots and racists. You have Republicans, you have Tea Party, the Jaybird Party, any party that you can think of, you have those elements. Because if you think about the police union right now in Florida, you got a police union in Florida saying that they are asking their members, they get discounted tickets for the Dolphins football game because of the individuals kneeling and raising their fists for police brutality. They're telling their union members to take their tickets back to the Miami Dolphins, and they are not going to support the Miami football team because the players are against first responders and police. That is not true.
Right.
That is totally not true. And when you can obfuscate, and back to what you're saying about, you can create a narrative, what they did with Black Lives Matter. I mean, the FBI came out with a report. It's called Black Identity. It's called Black Identity Extremist Report. Just came out this year. You guys get a chance, you need to read it. You really need to read it. Doctor? Yes, sir.
I think
He calls everyone. He calls.
Oh, I'm not sorry. The yellow hat.
One thing I maybe wanted to suggest is something that can kind of like reconcile intersectionality and individualism, and instead of prioritizing our own individual identities, is redefining what it means to be a citizen, and coming together to have a collective definition, both in local communities, on a national level, and hopefully, like you're saying, on a global level. So I think maybe a good first step is to think what it means to be a citizen to you individually, and then redefine that citizenship outward for others. And at least that's how I see things. And I see everybody as just a fellow citizens. So that really knocks down all of those biases or all of those transgressions that I may have had in the past or something else. So that's just a kind of a good lens to see.
Can I offer that we do see difference, but that we don't fear it.
Right,
I think that's where we get into trouble, because or fear it, or have biases towards it. I think it's very important to recognize that you walk in a different space than I do. But there's opportunities to not just even tolerate that, but to celebrate it and to understand that creates a diversity of thought, of experience. But I also think that for me, what has been very helpful is to understand that power and privilege exists. We all occupy either a place of power or privilege, depending on which identities we occupy. And I always do this exercise, and I do it with the young people I work with, where it's called we do a wheel exercise, where we will draw a wheel. We'll slice up the wheel into these little slices, and then in each one of those wheels, we will put an identity. So we will put race, class, gender, wealth, age, and we go through each one of those, and we identify who in that group in the U.S. holds the power, right? And then, so we get to see that when it comes to race, it's white. When it comes to gender, it's male. When it comes to class, it's wealthy. We go through and we identify all those. And then we have people go through and mark where they occupy the power. And I really like that wheel, because it shows that we're all complicit, right? Nobody is off the hook of doing this work. So like I said, I can definitely say that as a Black woman, I experienced gender and racial oppression, but I have to also hold and honor the fact that as an able-bodied person, I've been ableist, right? As a person born in the U.S., I occupy a place of power that an immigrant doesn't. I'm English speaking in the country, that I was born in. So I think for me, I want to recognize difference, but I also want to understand that that we all have work to do in terms of recognizing where we hold the power, and where we hold the power, that's where it's our job to distribute that power, right? And make sure that people who don't share our identities get it, but then where I'm experiencing oppression, that's kind of my job there, is to fight for my own liberation. But either way, there are times where I am the oppressor, depending on, you know, which identity I hold power in. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
I have a question. He was talking about the prisons, and right now the trend is in prisons. When I was reading a lot about it, well, they're clothes that say made in the USA are made by prisoners, and the prisons are hiring people to do the work that used to be done by people on the outside, because they don't have to pay those people anything. And a lot of people I told that to act like they never heard. A lot of people never heard of that. But that's the way we're going in this country, so I think that's one reason why they're trying to keep the prisons full, for this cheap labor. It's another, to me, another
And
way
what
of
did that used to be called?
slavery. Slavery.
And it's high-tech slavery today.
Yeah.
Again, most of your politicians have stock
Yeah.
in all of these different companies. Even Michael Jordan have stock in CCA and Gold Tech. These are two of the #1 private prisons that are in America, and they have just actually come online in the last 6 years. And actually the last year of this administration have these private prisons in the South have grown 1,000% because of the immigration policies and some things that the Obama administration was not doing, and this new administration have decided to do, which was basically inhumane. But to answer your question, and that's something that should get everybody up in arms when they know that you have individuals that are being locked up and they are producing products, making calls, and doing a lot of things that people on the outside should have a right to do. And again, our prison population since 1976, at one time, in 1976, there was 1.7.3 million Americans in prison, on probation or parole. 1.7. How do we get to 2018 and we over 9 million? Again, guys, that kind of, when you think about the war or what we're doing to our community and our, like he said, the citizenship, these citizens in America, what's going on with the haves and the have, as you just said, classism and all these things that are affecting us, we collectively got to say, stop, just stop this. This has to end, because how dare we allow our community or our country to be taken over basically by the 2%ers? Because that's what's happening, guys. Either you're going to be a worker bee or you're going to be on the throne, and everybody can't be on the throne. Let's share the throne.
And there's a book Michelle Alexander wrote, The New Jim Crow, and that she makes a clear like historical line between the end of slavery and then, you know, the creation of the mass incarceration system, and shows how that was a clear line to keep enslaved labor, because the end of slavery meant that all those people who had built their wealth on, you know, on free labor now had to like pay workers and there's also a documentary called 13th where it talks about the 13th Amendment, which says that basically you are a free person unless you're in prison. And if you're in prison, then you're essentially a slave. We have that in our amendment. And so I think that that book and the documentary, I know the documentary at one point was on Netflix, I'm not sure if it still is, but the documentary is just a visual representation of what she puts in the book. But it's called The New Jim Crow for that reason, because she makes that link. And recently I saw an article about firefighters in California who, yes, they have to fight fires. I think they're paid $2 an hour, if that. I don't know if they're even paid. But because they're felons, when they get out, they cannot apply to be firefighters. Yeah. So that kind of disenfranchisement, where as long as you are not getting paid to do it and risking your life, you can do it. But then when you get out, you cannot use that as a legitimate way to make a living, even though you have the skills, you've proven yourself to be willing to. So that kind of, but capitalism is that kind of thing where it always is about, you know, extracting the most labor. It's a profit over people model. It's, you know, and so that's another area of oppression, what capitalism does to people and to communities. When the bottom line is, how can we cut a profit? And because it's a competitive market where the person over here is cutting, you continue to try to cut to keep up right? So you continue to try and cut and cut and cut, and it impacts people and community.
Maybe one more question?
You had a question, sir?
Yeah, we have a question, it's more of a statement. There is it's on the books, it's called Federal Government Bonding. And from what I understand, what it is, that if a person has a felony, he can download this letter along and take it with his resume, and the federal government co-signs the job that he may go on. Michigan is giving, I think, $1,000 or $5,000 if you have a felony to hire that person. What I understand, it's given out over the years, but then somebody else said, well, it's just a tax credit. And going back to where you were talking about from the start, if you look at the $2 bill in the left-hand corner, and you have to look very hard, John Hanson was on the $2 bill. John Hanson was our first black president before we were the United States. So if they thought enough of another black man to make him president, times and things were very much different. You know what I'm saying? One other thing I've got to
Yeah, that was the colonial period. Mr. Hanson was the president, that's true. And then as far as the federal bonding program, actually the DOJ eliminated it back to this, the new administration. A lot of things, when y'all think about executive order, you know, that's one thing that's dangerous in America, these executive orders where different men can come in and do arbitrary things based on whatever they feel, which can affect a whole lot of people based on a good thing, you know. So yeah, that's been struck down in this administration.
Well, we know that these conversations continue after we break up. And so it's just about 7:30, so please, I'm sure, continue to ask questions or break into conversations. Next month, we're going to be talking about immigration, DACA, and all the immigration kinds of issues that are in front of us today and how those are impacting the midterm elections as well. So we hope you'll join us for that one. That one will be over, I think, just at the new McCree Theater. So we're doing the trauma piece at New McCree. The trauma, as in the kinds of trauma that go on in our communities and that impact. That's at the New McCree, only there. And then the immigration piece is here at the library next month. And again, just one place. Typically we do them in both places, but our speakers couldn't make both. So put those on your calendar for next month. Linda, her name just, thank you, just had to leave a little early, but she wanted me to remind you of 411.org, which is a place you can go online. It's down right now because they're updating it with all of the content for the midterm election, but in September it'll be back up. So you can go there to research all the issues that are on the ballot, and there are a number of issues on the ballot, as well as, of course, a number of candidates and a number of elections for candidates, I guess. But anyway, so think about 411.org, and I heard some really good ideas for how to do this the next time we have an election series. I love that idea of practice voting and taking that out into the community.
We used to do that in school.
We did, and they used
When I
that.
was a kid,
Yeah.
we used to do that.
But they used that to gauge how our parents were.
But I did learn trigonometry that I don't use at all.
Hey guys, can I ask you guys, we're going to be greeting students the first September the 4th. And we want you guys to come out and greet our students here at our public schools. It could be in your local area. We call this thing valuing our children. What we're trying to do is value these young people, that they matter, that they are important, that they are our future. September the 4th, we're going to be concentrating on Brownell, Scott's, International Academy, and New Standards. So you can pick a school. Please put this on Facebook, but it's September the 4th. The schools, all of them will be starting we need everybody at 7:30. It actually 7:45 when the kids get off the bus, start coming in. We just did Eagle's Nest yesterday. Eagle's Nest was one of the first schools started. And this whole concept came about as far as how we don't have to have the government, we don't have to ask Mott, we don't have to ask anybody for no grant or no help. How can we start working in our community, repairing some of our brokenness? And we need you guys to really tell your businesses, your friends, your neighbors, your clubs, your Rotary clubs, your pilot clubs, you guys that fly planes, anybody that scuba dive. You guys get everybody out to participate in valuing our students, greeting them as they come to school for the new year. Thank you.
Just give a big hug.
Which reminds me, I have a shameless plug that I meant to plug, and you reminded me that I need to do that. So like I said, we're with NextGen, which is an organization that registers new voters. Just in 2018 alone, we've registered 17,000 new voters. And our plan, and that's statewide, because we're a statewide program. Our plan is to register 30,000 more before October 9th, which is the deadline. So we have a huge goal, and a lot of that is working on campuses. So what we do is we do a welcome week thing where we go to the major campuses, and when they're having those, especially at those big schools, when they're having thousands of new students come in, we want to just be there like catching that rush of new students, those freshmen coming in. And so we're looking for volunteers who will work with us on those campuses to just register those volunteers. We will feed you, we'll give you water, but we really want to capture all those new voters. And if you're interested in doing that, let us know. We'd be happy to sign you up, make sure you get there. We can provide transportation, and it's at any of the colleges around that we're at in Michigan. So, thank you. Come see me if you're interested.